Deputy Adams. And would your neighbour beside you stay quiet as well, please? Thank you. Deputy Adams.
I note the absence again. I note the absence again of the Labour Party, Taoiseach. I don't know whether the Labour Party is taking up an abstentionist policy in relation to leaders' questions, or maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe they're embarrassed. But you know, you're sorry, or the sorry saga of your efforts to impose an additional water tax on households and your establishment of the now totally discredited Irish Water is a metaphor of how this government functions, or indeed how this government doesn't function. There was no need to impose an additional water charge in the first instance, but you did so. There was no need to pay £85 million of taxpayers' money to consultants, but you did that as well. You could have listened to suggestions from these benches, but instead you forced through the Water Services Bill. Back then, you going on, a subsidiary of SiteServe, you will recall, was given the lucrative contract for installing water meters across this state, all Taoiseach on your watch. And now we learn from the media that the government is discussing draconian new, unprecedentedly new powers to deduct water charges from citizens' wages, pensions and social welfare payments. Taoiseach, isn't it time to go back to the drawing board? Will you now even belatedly scrap the water charges?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Thank you, Deputy Adams. I've answered this question to you on a number of occasions. The Government do not intend to drop the setting up of Irish Water with its capacity to borrow, to invest and fix the many problems associated with water and wastewater throughout the country for quite a long time. The Government have a requirement here. You yourself, I recall stating in public that you intended, as a legislator and as a citizen, to pay your water charges. I think you were very straightforward about that. But for whatever reason, you changed your mind and said that you're not going to pay it. Well, the point is, Deputy Adams, it's about time now in the country that we've faced up to a situation that has been inadequate for so many years. We have to deal with it. And that is the lack of quality water in many places throughout the country and the lack of investment to deal with wastewater. And there is clearly a difference between those who can pay but who say they won't pay and those who cannot pay. And the Government recognise that very clearly. But we can't have a situation where very many citizens, huge numbers of people, understand that they must make a contribution, which is now very moderate, at €1.15 or €3 per week for water supply, and that they register and they pay, and they're in receipt of will be in receipt of their support from the Department of Social Protection, and others who receive the same water supply but who say they won't pay when clearly they can. And there will be a compliance regime to deal with that, because it's grossly unfair to expect one neighbour to pay and the other neighbour who takes for their own view the fact that they shouldn't pay. And again, I distinguish between those who can pay and won't pay, and those who cannot pay. And the Government recognise that very clearly. So the compliance regime, Deputy Adams, will be to deal with that fact, so that everybody can invest and contribute to having a country where you have high-quality water supplies and high-grade capability of dealing with wastewater, which is costing us reputation in many places throughout the country.
Deputy Adams.
Well, Taoiseach, your compliance regime, as you christen it, will penalise ordinary, hard-working families, pensioners and vulnerable citizens who have already borne the brunt of your government's austerity policies. And this latest plan, concocted by a Labour minister who is greatly concerned about his own legacy, also sets a very dangerous precedent. If a company such as Irish Water can take money from people's private bank accounts or pensions, where will this end? Will this legislation apply to on board GAISH, to the ESB, to Aircom? What's to stop private companies like, for example, a car dealership looking for an attachment order? And this latest contortion in the long-running efforts to impose water charges stands in direct contrast, Taoiseach, to your compliant and subservient attitude to the banks, who refuse point blank to deal fairly with families in mortgage distress. Yet you refuse to introduce legislation to oblige them to do so.
Question, please.
No problem legislating for a compliance regime for pensioners, social welfare recipients or workers, but the banks? You're prepared to bring in this unprecedented pocket-picking legislation against those citizens, but you refuse to legislate to protect citizens against the banks or to safeguard taxpayers' money. So explain that, Taoiseach, Tommy Cricknahan. Explain that. The two sets of values. Is Fine Gael the bankers' party? Is this government the bankers' party? Explain, Taoiseach, why you have one set of values dealing with ordinary citizens and are prepared to legislate in the way that you have given notice of, and you have refused point blank to do that in terms of the veto that you have given in copper fasting with the banks.
Well, as I said to Deputy Martin, the Government will bring in a number of further options next week, dealing with the question of banks dealing with distressed mortgage holders where there's clearly a problem and has been a problem for quite some time. And the Government's priority, Deputy Adams, is to see that the vast majority of people hold on to their homes and have an opportunity to stay in that home by means of following a number of options that will be presented here next week. In respect of the question that you ask about vulnerable citizens, I would say to you, Deputy, if you recall, that one of the first things this Government did was to reverse the minimum wage decrease that the previous administration had brought in. We have exempted 420,000 people from USC requirement payments entirely, and we'll bring that to 500,000 this year, and have reduced the USC requirement at the lower levels. And also, in respect of reducing the tax burden, Government have started to provide whatever flexibility that the people have won, so that goes to the most vulnerable citizens and most vulnerable categories that we have. The difference between the essential services like gas and electricity and telecommunications is that these services can be turned off and cut off. The Government have off. It's an essential and very important service for life, but clearly a contribution is necessary, and where it can be paid, then it will be paid.
Thank you. Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan.